So here we are. This is episode 23 of Storycomic Presents, and I have with us here in the studios the acclaimed author, fantasy and action adventure author, C.M. Lance, and we call you C.M. or do you want to go by Mike during this interview?
Go by Mike. Yeah.
Mike. Okay. Perfect. All right. So, and I know that we said Mike is pretty active within the Vermont Authors Circle there up in Craftsbury. We met with the Vermont Author Fest,
right? In Craftsbury. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we have, and that was, and I remember seeing, and then I was immediately drawn, and I think I didn't see anybody else that was writing fantasy novels, and.
No, it would surprise me.
Yeah.
That's such a popular genre.
It's you see, and depending on, I think, the geography and depending on the type of circles you can go in, you might see some history folks, you might see some biography folks, but I was really excited that I got to be right next, our tables were right next to each other, basically, at there. So I know you, Mike, but I want to make sure our viewers and listeners can get to know you as well. So what I'll do is that we'll start off the interview by having you tell everybody kind of your background, how you got into writing, and we'll go from there. So go for it.
Okay. I have a background that has absolutely nothing to do with writing. I graduated with an aerospace engineering degree and moved from Texas. I graduated in Texas, moved to LA to work on on airplanes to kill people with, the B-1 bomber. In fact, I have a model of the B-1 bomber. It's a swing wing airplane.
Oh, okay.
One of the reasons I got it was because it was an actual working swing wing model. And I did some of the structural design on the wing pivot for the B-1 bomber. And then while I was in college, I decided I didn't want to be an engineer. But being an engineering type, I did my analysis and figured out I could graduate with an engineering degree and get an MBA in the same time it would take me to switch majors.
Okay. Because
absolutely nothing I took as an aerospace engineering degree would transfer to business. So that's what I did. But then instead of going directly, somebody offered me a job. So I went to LA to work on airplanes. And then I enrolled at UCLA and worked part-time on getting an MBA. It took me about 4 years to do it. While I was in grad school, I ended up going to work for a financial consulting firm. They were needing some people who could do some programming for them. So I had a company called Wilshire Associates, and I worked with them for a couple of years. Then when I graduated, I went to work as an accountant for a telephone company. And so none of this seems to trend into writing yet. So then after I was an accountant for a couple of years, and I moved into product management for the telephone company's data communications equipment, which was in its infancy at that time, back in the late 70s, I guess, mid 70s. But I was did product management and product marketing for them. Then I went to work for a manufacturer of telecommunications equipment, data processing or data communications equipment for and did product management, moved into sales, and I went back and forth between product management and sales, both in large telecommunications switching systems that would switch up to 100,000 telephones at a time. Sold them to people like Sprint, AT&T, and that type thing. Then I sold fiber optic equipment. Still no connection with writing yet.
We know it's coming.
So in 2009, when the industry crashed, we were selling almost. I was selling to Sprint at the time. We were selling almost $1 billion a year to them, and it dropped off to 250 million, which is a huge drop. So they laid off half of our organization, over half of our organization, brought in a new team. And since it wasn't us that screwed things up, that made the sales drop, the new team got laid off a year later because they couldn't do anything with it either. But anyway, I got laid off. I was in my early 60s. I was bike riding because I had a lot of time on my hands. I swerved to go around a couple who was walking a dog and taking up the whole bike path. It had just rained a bit, and my bike slid out from under me as I swerved away from them, and I landed on my hip and broke my femur.
Oh, wow.
So that allowed me a bit of time with nothing to do, no work or anything else. So I thought, oh, what the heck, I'll write something. I've always enjoyed reading.
So this is the first time you've ever, at this point, this is the first time you've ever actually wrote something then? Like a book or okay.
No. I wrote department budgets, product specifications, product plans, marketing plans, and everybody assumed those were fictitious. So it was kind of a natural transfer. But anyway, I did try writing, and then I joined a writing group in Kansas City, which they had a really great writing group. I mean, we'd go to meetings once a week for about an hour and a half. Be up to 25 to 35 writers sharing what they're writing. You could bring things and you could read it, or actually with the moderators, if you send it ahead of time, would read it and critique it for you. So that helped a lot, and I engaged on it, writing an action adventure. And I wrote. I think I looked on my computer, and I've got 17 versions of that I wrote before I finally quit and said it really did suck. So, but I thought I'd learned a lot being with the writing group. So I started writing fantasy, one of my favorite genres. I started reading science fiction when I was in third grade. I think I read almost everything there was in science fiction, so I switched to fantasy. And decided I'd give that a shot. So I've written, now, just recently, I've written my 4th fantasy book. But after writing my 3rd fantasy book, I went back to my first book, The Action Adventure, which really was bad. And I completely rewrote it. So I guess that's at least version 18 by then. And I put that out before I got involved in the fantasy series. And I won an award. I was a finalist with the independent publishers of New England in the action adventure thriller category with the book Caribbean Layoff.
So let me ask you a question, Mike. Then you wrote Caribbean Layoff. That was the book you said you wrote 17 versions of, correct?
Right.
Is that the same one? So you wrote that, and give us a brief synopsis without giving away the ending. Give us a kind of a brief synopsis for the viewers and listeners of what the book is about. What does it say on the back cover, basically?
Basically, it's about a fellow who comes across an auto wreck. It's run off the road down into a creek. He goes down to try to help who is ever in it, finds out that the driver is dead, has gone through the windshield. So he's getting ready to call the police or whatever. He would have to leave because there was no cell service where he was. But then he noticed in the passenger side, there was a pile of money. So the only way he could access the vehicle was, it was a van, white van, hanging over the creek. The only way he could get in, because it was hanging, the front end was hanging over the creek, was through the back. So he went to the back of the van and he opened it up, and it turned out it was full of money and drugs. He couldn't help the driver. There were no witnesses. So he took the money, left the drugs, took the money. Thought he was scot-free because there were no witnesses. But the cartel had someone who worked for the Drug Enforcement Agency who was on their payroll. Okay. And they sent him to try to find the money. And he was a pretty good detective. Huh. And he managed to start tracking the man who stole the money. And this is a tale of how they were trying to take the money and stash it in the Caribbean, and he was getting closer and closer and closer to them. And it's similar to a lot of other stories, but this has a much happier ending than.
So you wrote, because you wrote that, but then you said after 17 tries, you said, yeah, then you decided to write. So when you decided to write fantasy after that, was it Wizard Dawning was then the book that was
the first book that I self-published.
So my question is for you, Mike, is that, so it's two completely separate genres, your action adventure and then your fantasy. Mm-hmm. Did you feel as though that writing the fantasy was more successful for you because when you put it together? Because is it like the fantasy genre seems to be more forgiving in how to write it as compared to an action adventure where it takes place in like a real geography and real places that you'd be referencing?
Well, my fantasies take place in a real geography. They're contemporary urban fantasy. So they take place in Minnesota and Chicago. No, the reason I think I had more success with the fantasy is practice. I wrote 17 versions and did a lot of things wrong, but began to learn, and particularly joining the writers group helped a lot. I learned a lot from the other writers. In fact, one of the things that we did is about 7 or 8 of us formed a critique group where we met every week, and we would review each other's 10 pages worth of writing from the previous week. And that was extremely valuable in helping me improve my writing to where I didn't feel like it smelled.
So you mentioned so would you consider that almost to the point where, and how was that from the critiques? We'll have, if we have some folks that are listening to this that are, budding authors, or maybe they're authors that kind of work by themselves, what would you consider like the benefit of having a critique group or having a read local group that is able to talk to each other and share stuff? And then my follow-up question to that would be, did everybody have the same level of writing, or was it different levels?
It was different levels. So one of the members of the critique group was a former newspaper editor. He knew where every comma, period, spelling, abbreviation, he knew everything. Another one was a lawyer, and she wrote a lot as a lawyer, and then she ended up being a VP of HR at Hallmark. So she did a lot of writing, and then another person taught writing in college. And one of the benefits to it is not just the people were there, but it was the practice, not only writing, and getting your own work critiqued, but critiquing other people's work. I think that helps make you a better writer too, because you see how people might be doing things different ways, different from your own, that might be worthwhile looking at. When I first started writing, everything was action, action, action. And direct dialogue, later on, I started being able to get into people's minds from dealing with the critique group and seeing other people do that.
Mm. So what were some of the points compared to your first version of Caribbean Layoff to the 18th version of Caribbean Layoff? What were some of the points on there that you saw in this in the story that you knew you got right away? You got right the first time that still stayed throughout all versions of the story?
I think I have a fairly good handle on action.
Okay.
The action pieces of it stayed pretty much the same. My dialogue got a lot better over time. My spelling got better. and one of the things was the punctuation and that type of stuff. I learned so much from the other folks in the critique group that it helped me move forward with that.
So talk to us a bit about also, as you mentioned earlier, that through all of your books are all independently published, correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So what would you notice as well as part of some of the benefits of doing the independent publishing route instead of going through the traditional publishing route?
Well, I've known, having a large group of authors, the Kansas City Authors Group, I knew some who had been published, but they weren't big sellers. And one of the problems was they were published. If they're not immediately successful, generally, their publishers back off advertising for them and all the other things that the publisher is supposed to do. But the author can't take the book back and do it for themselves now. They're stuck. So unless you have a pretty good book, it's going to sit in some publisher's basement, not doing much. Whereas Amazon really has turned around the publishing world by making it so much easier to self-publish. There are authors who are self-published and are making quite a good living selling their books through Amazon. And mostly Kindle books, not much in the way of paperbacks.
Right.
Because EPUB has really grown by leaps and bounds.
Yeah. And you did mention too is that and so you're still connecting also now with your Kansas City critique group as well, correct?
Right. Yeah. Every week we get together on Zoom now. Used to be they'd get together after I moved away, and I would send my critiques in via email using the critiquing capabilities of Microsoft Word, and they'd send me theirs the same way. But now we're getting together on Zoom, which is going to be really neat because used to be I was a bit disconnected. Now I see them. We only get together on Zoom twice every other week, but we still exchange documents every week.
Wow, that's pretty. And how big is that group? Is it?
Right now, it's 6 people.
Okay.
It was up to 8. Unfortunately, 2 of them died. Another one, because of work, had to pull away. But then we picked up another one who taught English in high school. So anyway, at least I'm getting my grammar and punctuation still corrected.
Right. Yeah. No. And so I want us to switch gears a little bit and talk about your fantasy series. So you have 4 books out so far.
Right.
Do you want to give give our audience and our viewers and our listeners just kind of a background of the series?
Okay, sure. The premise is it's some few years in the future, and magic has grown in the world. Has a lot to do with climate change. and people are starting to recognize there's magic. In fact, they give the equivalent of the SAT for magic to people. The protagonist in the book, Sigurd, has actually named after my father-in-law.
That got you some points, I bet.
Yeah, I think so. Sigurd took the test, had no magic, so he pretty much figured he'd be living a mundane life. Then his great grandfather shows up, who has rarely been in the area, injured by a dark wizard, and wants to pass on his magic legacy to Sig. Sig says, "I have no magic," and his magic is in an amulet that when he gave it to Sig had no other magic showing, but for the one thing, he could change into a 9-foot tall, 700-pound battle wizard, physically, complete with sword. In fact, sword looks something like this. It'll turn out, and people will find out that this jewel here has a lot to do with Sig's magic as they go through the series. But, oh, by the way, you're a Photoshop guy. This is all Photoshop.
Yeah.
I mean,
and my guess is maybe that will kind of feed into does it have anything to do with the title of the fourth book then?
yes, it does.
Okay.
The title being Dragon Eye.
Yeah.
There is, and I guess it's not giving something away, but there is something in the third book that said that that jewel is actually a dragon eye. It's kind of made to look a bit like an eye.
Mm-hmm.
And Sig said, "Oh my God, a dragon died to give me magic." And the ancient witch he's talking to said, "Who said the dragon died?" There are no dragons on Earth anymore. So the idea of the magic coming from a dragon eye is kind of strange, but they managed to connect with the dragons later on.
Okay.
But anyway, so Sig was in Minnesota. He was attacked by a dark mage, the same one that had attacked his great grandfather. Another wizard, who is the dean of the physics of magic school at Northwestern University in Chicago, came and rescued him. And Sig then went to. He was a senior in high school, so he left early to go to Northwestern to study the physics of magic, and that's basically the premises of the book. He's constantly battling the dark mage, because the dark mage knows that his great grandfather was the leader of the battle wizards, and he saw a forecast that Sig would be a much more powerful wizard, and he stole his magic when Sig was a child. That's the reason he has no other magic other than the ability to change shapes. And so it's most of the way is he's trying to regain his magic by capturing or perhaps killing the dark mage.
Mm. So I'm really curious to, talking to somebody who is a career engineer who is writing fantasy. So what is your process of putting together the book? Now, did you have like a meta plot timeline already planned out? Do you sit down and do outline specific to say chapter this? Do you just wing it? How does that talk to us a bit about how your process is of actually creating this this fantasy series?
I had imagined, I used to travel a lot, and sometimes people get on the airplane that are just very large. And I just imagined maybe somebody huge getting on the airplane. And that kind of evolved into Wizard Dawning. And no, I just wing it. I just sat down and started writing. And I'd like to say that I did outlines and things like that, but what I would do is I would write probably at least a quarter of the book, sometimes a third, and then I'd sit down and do an outline of where I thought the book should go. And then if I went back and looked at the outline, I would realize that the way it turned out, it has nothing to do with well, it has some vague resemblance to the outline, but I would branch off, but at least it gave me some structure in my mind to start forward again. And then I just would start winging it again.
So I haven't seen anything in the description of the fourth book as being the last book. How many more? Is this the last, or do you have other books coming out with this series?
I'm trying to decide what to do next. I've had a number of people say that they'd like to have a follow-up to Caribbean Layoff. I think in some ways Caribbean Layoff is probably one of my better books, if not the best book. And people have asked me to do that. If not, I think what I'll do is I'll do some more Battle Wizards books, but I will probably start another series about another battle wizard.
So you've been pretty set up. So do you see, so talk to us a bit about the world building aspect of the world building aspect of the Battle Wizard Saga. Do you have it as a, because as you said, as you're writing it, so when you're writing and you're typing out and you're going over it, you're like, well, that's a really good idea. Let me write that down. I got to figure out what the answer is to that question that I posed, or that's that seed I planted for another plot line. Like, and then when you introduce like different monsters and different, creatures in the world, do you sit back and kind of figure out like backwards, like the timeline of how these creatures came or where they came from or all that kind of other aspects of it as well?
When I come to the point when I need to have Sig have another problem in his life, another monster that comes out, I research monsters. And although my website is not working very well right now, I would take a lot of the research and I would copy it onto my website, pictures. Like I had one of the monsters as he battled was a manticore, combination of a lion and
the scorpion tail.
Scorpion, yes, yeah. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
A combination of a lion and a scorpion. I researched, I got pictures of manticores from all over the internet. I got descriptions about manticores. So at first I was just keeping that for myself. I thought, why not put it on the web? So if people are interested, they can go and find out more about manticores if they're interested in that, or about grimoires, books about magic, those types of things. So I just did a lot of research to try to figure out where, because when you're writing, no matter what field you're writing in, there are other books out there, and you want to remain somewhat consistent. Otherwise, people who've read other pieces of fantasy about the same type thing are going to say, oh, this is BS. I've read other books and it doesn't happen this way. So you need to not only stay consistent in your world building within your book, you've got to stay consistent across the genre. Otherwise, you'll drive readers away. You don't have to be 100% consistent, though. It's always interesting to introduce new wrinkles. there's an author by the name of Kevin Hearn who writes about druids, and he just does a tremendous job of introducing new information about druids. So I tried to copy some of that.
And so, why did you decide when you decided to write the series that you wanted it to take place in the real world instead of like a made up, like a world of your own choosing?
Two reasons. One is because I particularly like contemporary fantasy. It's just something I enjoy. And the world building is some ways easier and some ways harder. As long as you keep it fitting within the current world, you don't have to invent how the current world goes. You don't have to figure out, do they travel around in carriages or on horseback, that type of thing. They do it like they do right now. So you don't have to do that part of the world building, but you do need to make your fantasy characters fit into this world. So in some ways it's easier, and some ways it's harder.
And did you find it all the places that you mentioned in within the series, are the physical locations, are they places that you actually have, the places that you've been to, or has it been that you have to do a lot of research on those physical locations?
I've been to, I have been to them. Well, as far as, it started out in Minnesota and moved to Chicago, so I've been to both those places. But then they've also gone across to Europe and into France, and I had to do a lot of research on those areas in the mountains of France and on the border between France and Italy and those types of things. So actually, I've done a lot of research, has a lot of pictures on those. To Australia, I've never been to Australia, but I've lived in Texas, LA, San Jose, back to LA, back to Dallas, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Kansas City, and then now here in Vermont. And none of those places fit in. My wife is from Minnesota, so we've been there quite a bit visiting family. And a lot of my mother's family is from Chicago, so we've been there a number of times. But
so I have a question, and I'm going to ask this question probably for other interviews because I'm curious about what the answer would be. So did you write your story based off of where the story was heading, or did you write it where you wanted it to go?
What exactly do you mean by where it was heading?
Like if it's just naturally as the story was going, it was just kind of going off in a direction that you weren't planning on it to going, and you just went with it, or did you kind of steer it into the direction you wanted the story to? When I started
out, again, I was winging it. I had no real plans about how it was going to turn out. I just started writing about him, and his very first encounter in the first chapter is he runs across zombies that are chasing him. The dark mage has set them on him. And I didn't want to do that because I don't like zombies. My wife doesn't like zombies. But that's the way it happened. He killed them off, re-killed them fairly quickly. We never had any more zombies again.
So it's a little bit of both, where sometimes Sig does things that Sig does, and you just really aren't much in control. And then there's other times where you kind of steer him in the direction you want him to go.
He's not in control in a big way because his nemesis, the Dark Mage, who actually, when he went to Northwestern, was the dean of the physics of magic school, didn't know he was the Dark Mage after him. But the Dark Mage did not come after him as much as he sicked other monsters and demons and evil spirits on Sig trying to kill him. The Dark Mage kind of stood back And that's one of the things that made it so hard for Sig to try to find him to get his magic back.
And so you mentioned that you named Sig after your father-in-law. Is there any other characters you've kind of had homages to that are other major characters in the stories that you've have references to other people in your life?
Can't think of any right offhand.
So even so, you probably, even if there was somebody you have the dark mage based off of, you probably wouldn't say that anyway, right?
Yeah, that rotten person was. Yeah. So that teaches people, don't piss off an author or you'll end up in his book. And not in a good way.
Yeah. It was that the zombies were these people. Yeah. So let me ask you this other question. So, I mean, your two major books there, you have your Battle Wizard Saga series, and then you have Caribbean Layoff. Do you see them, is it a possibility that they are actually in the same shared universe?
You mean that they may end up in a book together?
Well, because you kind of like insinuate that like the Battle Wizard Saga is kind of like a future, like it happens sometime in the future.
Yeah, a few years in the future when climate change has impacted. And that also allows you not to have to put things in it like COVID-19 and those. One of the authors in my critique group is battling with how she's going to deal with COVID-19 in her book. And I said, just don't say anything about it. You don't give a year, generally give a year. One of the other authors has a lot of dates in hers, but never the year, just the time of year. So by setting it out a few years allows you to step away from some of the things that you don't know how to deal with, like COVID-19.
Right. I mean, there's one author that always said that his stories take place next Tuesday, and that's all he says. So.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I was just curious because in the way I feel like even if you, for instance, if you're writing like the friends of the people that really follow your work,
Mm-hmm.
did you have that like both Caribbean Layoff and also your fantasy series? Would you put in, like, as you're talking about, like a potential sequel to Caribbean Layoff? Would you add in some kind of references that only the Battle Wizard Saga folks would get, like something about a little treat or a little Easter egg that's in the background of the story or anything like that?
That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that, but that a little bit of a bridge there for those in the know.
Yeah, and even like some sort of hint at something in the past about something about the Caribbean Layoff in like your fifth book or something in Battle Wizards.
Right. I think I mentioned to you an author that I'm really blown away with by the name of Lindsay Baroker. I don't know if you've read any of her stuff, but she usually does a series of 4 to 8 books, I guess. But she's written like, coming up on 60 or 70 books. And she will sometimes spawn off another series based on a series she's already written, as well as she's written fantasy and science fiction, and she will she just goes on and on anyway. But yes, spawning off a related, if you have a series that people like, if you spawn off a related series, that's usually a good technique.
Yeah, she's the one that does the I'm looking at it, like the Emperor's Edge.
That's a great series.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Warrior Mage. Yeah. The Chains of Honor. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so let me ask you, because you did mention her, what are some of the other authors that that you have on your list of um, uh,
Favorites?
yeah, your favorites?
Jim Butcher.
Okay, Dresden Files, yeah.
Dresden Files, absolutely. Kevin Hearn, who he writes about the Druid in contemporary times. Jim Butcher is a contemporary fantasy author as well.
Well, yeah, and you also have on there, the India Drummond, the urban, okay.
Yeah, India Drummond was very good. Been a while since I've read. Actually, I just started another series of hers a little while ago, and then I had to jump off. I'm critiquing two other authors. I'm being a beta reader for them, so I had to jump off of the India Drummond to read the other authors' information. One author in Kansas City and one here in Vermont.
And do you find that the importance of, so this was another question, is like, if somebody is independent publishing, do you feel as though like having a beta reader, and for those that are listening, a beta reader is basically someone who will read the book for you and kind of give you feedback. Mm-hmm. Is that a replacement of an editor?
Not really. The critique group that I'm in is more like the editor, the misspellings, the commas, that type of thing. Beta reader is a person who read it and say, be going along, go, wait, that doesn't make sense, or why is he doing this, or and give you feedback on their impression of the book. Of course, if there's typos and that type of thing, you want that information as well. But they're the ones who will read it and say the book makes sense, or it's good, or it's not good.
And you have, so what would you say is that the biggest takeaways of like a very specific example of something that you've gotten from your critique groups that you have held close for all this time, that something that you're constantly reminding yourself, like you hear that voice reminding you about it as you're writing? What's that one big piece of advice or something that you're glad you were told that?
There's been so much. I've been in the critique group now for since 2010. Yeah. Late 2010. So for 10 years, wow. Hadn't even thought about that. That's a long time. There is so much, and one of the people, a fellow by the name of Norm Legend, who died not too long ago. He had so many pieces of advice. I'm trying to figure out any particular one that would do it. Of course, the commas and he was the editor, so all the commas and everything else, I learned a tremendous amount from him from that. But he always wanted it to be. He said, make it believable. If you believe it, if you can make it believable, people will feel it's believable. If you don't think it's believable, it won't work. So I guess that's probably the biggest thing.
So what's some of your advice to some budding authors or people that are struggling putting together their first manuscript? What are some advice that you would give authors that are writing now?
Well, working on your own, everybody works on their own, but you need to have people to bounce it off of. Whether you can find a bunch of beta readers, or I think the critique group that I belong to has been a tremendous help. They can tell you when you're doing things right, when they can believe what you're doing. You can learn writing structure, so much more. And it's not just the fact I find, not just the fact that they critique yours, it's what you learn from critiquing theirs. I've had a couple of authors that I belong in a small group here in Vermont too, which we haven't been doing the Zoom. Maybe we ought to think about doing that. But they ask me to critique their work, and they seem to think I do a good job of it because they keep asking me to do it. And believe me, it's not something I learned as an aerospace engineer. It came from writing and critiquing, and not only having other people critique mine, but me critiquing theirs as well. And in critiquing, you want to. I have a thing I do when I'm critiquing is I will highlight parts that I like. I'll highlight in yellow, and I tell them in the beginning, if it's highlighted in yellow, it's because I really thought that paragraph, that phrase, that scene was really good. So as they're reading through it, they'll see something in yellow and they know they did good, because you want to not only tell them what they're doing wrong, you want them to continue doing what they're doing that's good. So I always emphasize doing that. I guess that's one of the things that one of my fellow authors in the critique group is also very good at. He points out all the places much more than where he has a problem, what he likes, which is a great thing to do, because sometimes you may doubt yourself. Is this really good? And if somebody says, this is good, you know, you should continue that way.
And I was going to ask you, like, what, you know, some of those, you know, it's, you know, some of those folks who might be afraid to get critique is, but there must be an art to it as well. So you don't want to just completely rip apart someone's work that they've been doing for 6 months. So what's kind of like is that something that you learned over time, or is that something that is?
Well, that's one of the things that helped with the big group I was in, with the 25 to 35 authors, that you didn't get your submission reviewed every week. You might be once a month or something like that, but you got to see what other people were commenting about on other people's work. And a lot of it was, this is good, this part is good, but would you think about this? So you need to realize that authors have fragile egos like everyone does. You've got to deal with that too. And you've got to definitely make sure that they continue doing what they're doing right.
Right. Yeah. Oh, okay, good.
And that's another thing about, if you can find a group that you don't have to submit something to every week. You don't have to critique. I don't think I could have started that way, but I was in a large enough organization. I could just sit back and listen to what everybody else was talking about. People who had been in the readers group a lot longer than I had, and hear what they were saying, what their input, and how people accepted it. Particularly if you could start out, if you've never been in a group like that, start out in a group where you don't have to submit yourself, even your comments in the beginning, that you can just sit and listen. That was extremely helpful.
And so how long did it take before you actually started submitting your stuff then in that first round? Because as you mentioned earlier, at the very first time you were part of it, you didn't write any, you had no books, you didn't write it, you hadn't done anything to write. So they accepted you in with open arms, even though you...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was just a group of aspiring writers. Some of them were published. Others were just picking up the pen. Some of them did correct them and say, don't use a pen, use your typewriter.
Yeah. Real quick, what's your writing schedule? What's your strategy like? So what do you, do you usually get most of your ideas at night, or you wake up, on the crack of dawn with a cup of coffee? How does that, do you work? As you said, do you write it down with pencils first? Do you type it all out? How does that? What's your
Well,
method?
I do it all on my laptop, and I find I like to. My wife and I are different. She likes to read in the mornings, and I like to watch the news. She likes to watch TV at night. I like to write. So while she's watching TV, I'll be writing. I may even be in the same room with her, but I could learn to tune out a lot of the shows that she watches that she enjoys, and just write. Of
Yeah.
course, I haven't been doing anything for quite some time because I've been working on this bathroom, but it's almost done.
Yeah, that's good. That nice project for you to keep you busy, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Keep you out of trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So Mike, we're knocking on the top of the hour. So real quick, where can people find you if they want to read your books or follow you?
Well, they could always go to Barnes and Noble if they wanted a book, but mostly my books are sold on Amazon, and most of the readers are Kindle readers. I also have my books on Kindle Unlimited. If they're Kindle Prime members, they can go on Kindle and pick up the book and read it for free. They borrow it until they fill up their 10-book list, and then if they want a new book, they add another one. But mostly, yeah, I do it. A lot of stuff is Kindle Unlimited, which I've been very pleased with.
And is that something that you had to register as to be a part of the Kindle Unlimited, or is that part and parcel of the self-publishing?
You just have to check a box and say you're part of Kindle Unlimited. There are some limitations. You can't publish on other ebooks like Apple. You have to be on Kindle for your Kindle for your ebook, but you get paid for every page that a person reads. They don't even have to finish the whole book. They borrow it, they read it. If they don't like it and they've finished it after 400, you only get 400 pages. They like the whole thing, then you get paid for that too. That's Amazon's done some really interesting things in the world of e-publishing.
Wow. Yeah. Huh. And they can find you also, is that you have it's cm-lance.com
Right,
as well?
cm-lance.com, which some of the menus aren't working now, and I've got to get busy fixing that. As I mentioned, I just added security to my website for the first time, and it's the scroll down menu stopped working, so I'll have to figure out why that is.
Yeah.
I think it has something to do with the security.
Yeah. And so what's next? You just had your fourth book out. That just came out in June, I believe, correct?
Late May, yeah.
Okay. And that's the Dragon's Eye.
Dragon Eye, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of the end of this series. So there's actually people can buy the first 3 books for the cost of 2 or less than the cost of 2. So they can read the first 3, and then they like those, they come in as a set.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then they can get the 4th one.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. This has been fun, and I'm really excited to keep reading your series, and that, especially as you mentioned that your Caribbean Layoff was a finalist, it got an award for that as well. And I think if you're going to listen to the demands of your fans and put out a sequel to that, I'd be pretty excited to talk to you about that too.
And that's the one that people keep telling me they need to make a movie out of it.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. And it was great talking to you.
Great talking to you too, Barney. Yeah. Well, another thing about that show, you probably heard this. Nobody on the show is married, except for one guy who's a drunk.
Yeah, because they're not married. They're having to go on dates or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right.
Is there a message there?
Well, it's one of those things about also like all the Disney cartoons. The mom's always dead. Like there's always that you never could. All the protagonists never come from. Never come from from like both parents are alive. It's always from some sort of broken home. The Incredible Mr. Limpet. That's the movie.
That was it. Yes. Yeah. In fact, Sig only has one parent alive too.
See?
So I was copying them, I guess.